Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, the Timberwolves have a rotation problem. Chris Finch needs to take note. Tim Conley needs to take note. We'll talk about what the Wolves need to do to shore up some of these late game issues and really persistent throughout the game issues. We'll talk about all that next.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Happy Hump Day. Happy Thanksgiving Eve for those of you in the U.S., and happy game day. The Timberwolves take on the Thunder tonight on ESPN, and it's going to be tough sledding for sure. We'll talk about that toward the end of the game or the end of the show today. We'll talk Wolves Thunder. We'll preview that matchup, but I want to get into some rotation stuff first, some lineup stuff. Talk about just how we'll kind of revisit what we did a week ago as the numbers have become even more stark with the Timberwolves, just their miserable defensive lineups. And then also what's going on with their offense and why they're struggling to score over the last handful of games. They're bottom third of the league over the last 2 weeks offensively after being a top 5 offensive team to that point. And they're still like borderline top 10 over, the full body of work over the first 6 weeks of the season. But the last couple of weeks have been tough. So we'll talk about the offense as well. We'll talk a little bit about the bench, and then we'll get to Wolves Thunder here toward the end of the show. Big thank you off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. All right. I want to start by talking about the Timberwolves defense, and then we'll get into some offense here in a second. But I talked about this on yesterday's show. So Tuesday's show, which was the post-game pod after the Monday night collapse in Sacramento. I talked about a tweet from Jace Frederick, the fantastic Pioneer Press reporter that covers the Timberwolves. And he had been basically live tweeting during the game about how are the Timberwolves doing this again with no Gobert and no Jaylen Clark on the floor. They're double-digit lead goes down to 5, whatever. And so we talked about that on yesterday's show. And I, as promised, I pulled those numbers, and I'm going to share with you once again just how bad the lineups are with no Rudy Gobert and no Jaylen Clark. Okay, so with no Rudy on the floor, these are lineup numbers, not specifically on-off, which is a little bit different. So with no Rudy on the floor, the Timberwolves are a 42nd percentile overall team. Okay, so no Rudy lineups are 42nd percentile among all 5-man lineups in the league. Any 5-man lineup that does not include Rudy Gobert, it's a minus 2.7, a 42nd percentile unit. They're 95th percentile offensively, so really good without Rudy on the floor, because basically that means you've got Randle and Reid in the front court in 95% of those lineups. So it's a 95th percentile, no Rudy offensive unit, but it's 2nd percentile defensively. They're giving up over 128 points per 100 possessions, while they're only scoring 125.5 per 100 possessions, hence the minus 2.7. Okay. That's just strictly with no Rudy. So those lineups, of course, could include Jaylen Clark and Jaden McDaniels. Now, if you tweak that and you take Jaylen Clark off the floor as well, so no Rudy, no Jaylen Clark, what happens? Well, it goes from a 42nd percentile unit to a 10th percentile unit. And the defense goes from 2nd percentile to 1st percentile with no Jaylen Clark on the floor and no Rudy Gobert on the floor. It's a 1st percentile defensive unit. And overall, again, the I guess bigger, more important overall point is that the total unit goes from 42nd percentile to 10th percentile with no Jaylen Clark and no Rudy Gobert, a minus 13.4. And that unit gives up 136 points per 100 possessions, which is absolutely miserable. Now, take that a step further, or I guess the other permutation there is, how about no Rudy or no Jaden McDaniels? Okay, so no Rudy, no McDaniels, but Clark could be on the floor in these units. It's a 44th percentile unit, 91st offensively, and 6th defensively. So actually very similar to the numbers with just no Rudy. Now, if none of the three are on the floor, this thing is a 3rd percentile 5-man unit. 3rd percentile. So, said another way, about as bad as it could possibly be. Now, the defense can't get much worse than it already had been. in the no Jaylen, no Rudy lineups, but 3rd percentile total, 58th percentile offensively, and 1st percentile defensively, almost 137 points per 100 possessions. So in short, the team is completely unplayable if none of the 3 of those guys are on the floor, which obviously was a problem when Jaylen Clark missed a couple of games and is a problem when Rudy gets into foul trouble, right? Now, it underscores what I said a week ago, which became that much more clear against Phoenix on Friday and Sacramento on Monday, is when Rudy's not on the floor, Jaylen Clark needs to be on the floor. This is a 10th percentile team without Rudy and without Jaylen Clark. And they give up 136 points per 100 possessions without those guys on the floor. To this point this season, Jaylen Clark has made has been more impactful than Jaden McDaniels. And I know that's confusing because Jaden was so good offensively over the first month of the season. He hasn't been the last 2 weeks. And like, you could look at the on-off numbers to tell that story. Gobert's the best on-off guy on the team. DiVincenzo's second. Julius Randle's third, despite the defensive numbers not being very good for Julius. Jaylen Clark is fourth. He's got a plus 6.1 on-off on cleaning the glass, 69th percentile. I should say all these numbers I'm citing currently are cleaning the glass numbers for lineups and the on-off. Jaylen Clark is ahead of Anthony Edwards. He's ahead of Jaden McDaniels. And, of course, he's ahead of everybody else that comes off the bench for the Timberwolves. Fourth on the team and on-off. And the lineup data really just reiterates that. Jaylen Clark is really important to what the Timberwolves are doing. The defense needs some combination of Rudy Gobert, Jaylen Clark, and to this point, to a lesser extent, Jaden McDaniels. But it's completely untenable to play a lineup without any of those 3 guys, and a bad idea to play a lineup without Rudy or Jaylen Clark on the floor. The defense has just not been up to snuff without them. And there's really no other way to say that. Now, the offense. What's wrong with the offense over the last couple of weeks? I mentioned this right off the top here today, but the Timberwolves' overall offensive, I'm going to pull the last 2 weeks here on cleaning the glass. I think they're 20th in the league over the last 2 weeks in terms of offense. And that's not great for a team that was top 5 for so long earlier this season. Let's see. Last 2 weeks, Minnesota is 20th in offense. They're 3rd in defense, but they're 20th in offense over the last couple of weeks. And that means that the body of work, as of right now, over the first 6 weeks, Minnesota is 9th in defense and 8th in offense. This was a top 5 unit just a couple of weeks ago. So what's wrong with the offense? Well, there's a couple of things here too, and it's less lineup related in my mind. Overall, the process and the caveat here, or the counterpoint, I do want to I don't want to lose sight of the fact this is still a top 10 offense. Okay. But 2 things. Over the last 2 weeks, I think the process has been very similar to what it was over the first month. The difference is they're missing 3-point shots. They're missing mostly open 3-point shots. And that's the biggest problem over the last, certainly in the Phoenix game and the Sacramento game. Yes, turnovers have been a massive problem over those 2 games as well. But missing open shots has been the biggest problem. They're still generating open shots. They're just missing them. However, the other thing that's important to note is over the first 6 weeks of the season, so the full body work through 17 games for Minnesota, the shot profile of the Timberwolves offense is a bit more tenuous than what it was last season. What do I mean by that? Well, they're shooting less threes. Okay. So when you miss your open threes, it's a much bigger deal. Like, they're still 9th in the NBA in 3-point percentage, but they were top 3 until a couple of weeks ago. Really the last 10 days. And when you take less threes, that's a problem if you don't make the ones that are actually open. Overall this season, Minnesota's 16th in 3-point percentage league-wide, or 3-point rate, not percentage. They're top 10 in percentage still. They're 16th in 3-point rate, according to Cleaning the Glass. They're also 16th in mid-range frequency, and they're 17th in shots at the rim. Compare that to last year, where Minnesota was 6th in 3-point frequency. So they went from 6th to thus far this season, 16th. From 13th in rim attempts last year to 17th this year. And they were 26th in mid-range jumpers, which is what Chris Finch generally wants, to 16th this year. That shot profile is a little bit untenuous. I would say it's dangerous. This year, Minnesota's location expected effective field goal percentage. This is on Cleaning the Glass. Last season, it was 5th in the NBA, meaning their shot distribution, where they're shooting the ball on the floor, was 5th best in the league. So far this season, it's 17th. The reason why the offense has still been top 10 is because they made so many threes earlier this season. The free throw rate's been pretty good overall, despite the lack of pressure they're putting on the rim to this point. And also, by the way, they're 5th in rim percentage. So they're really good at making shots at the rim, and they're really good at making threes, but they're just taking a few too many mid-range jumpers. And ultimately, those chickens are going to come home to roost when they shoot less free throw attempts. And we're already seeing it when they don't shoot as well from a difficult place to shoot, which is mid-range. They're 19th in mid-range percentage. That's going to matter. So the overall shot quality that they're getting this season isn't as good as last year. And they've gotten a little bit fortunate over the first 4 weeks, at least 4+ weeks, with their accuracy on those shots. But if your shot selection isn't as good, if your shot mix isn't as tenable, then if you miss some of those open jumpers, or you don't get the calls and you don't get to the free throw line and you don't put pressure on the defense when you're in the bonus, then your overall offensive production is going to go down and you're going to struggle to score in close late situations, which obviously happened the last 2 times out. So it's a mix of problems regarding the offense. I would say shot selection overall is okay, but it's just a more dangerous kind of concoction of shots than it was last season. And that's something to keep an eye on. All right. I want to talk a little bit about the bench next. We'll talk about the bench rotation, and we'll get into the OKC matchup here next. That's what we'll do the rest of the show today. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors at Game Time. Basketball season is not just here. We are 6 weeks into the season now, and nothing beats being in the arena for the opening games of the year. But let's be real. Getting tickets can be a total headache between waiting in queues, surprise fees, and prices that jump right before checkout. It's easy to get frustrated when all you want to do is cheer on your team, and that's where Game Time comes in, the app that gives fans the advantage. It's your ultimate life hack for scoring amazing NBA tickets fast, easy, and stress-free. The Timberwolves have a couple games this weekend. Obviously, tonight in OKC, 2 days off for Thanksgiving and the Friday after. And then Saturday, home for the Celtics at 4 p.m. They've got a home game Sunday as well. If you're trying to get Wolves Celtics tickets, I know the Celtics aren't quite the same as what they were, but former Timberwolves Josh Minott, Luka Garza, who doesn't want to see Jaylen Brown play? Like, it's a fun matchup. You can find tickets on Game Time right now, and a lot of times you can find NBA tickets for under $25. My favorite thing about Game Time is the zone deals. They're an absolute game changer. You can pick the section, and then Game Time will pick your seats. But the best part is that then you save big. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. That's code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. All right. Big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen of the day. And a reminder that Locked On is now the #1 sports podcast network. We could not do it without you, the loyal listeners who make us your first listen every day. So we do greatly, greatly appreciate it. All right. We talked about the shot selection or shot making because I think both are a thing, clearly. And I shuffled, if you're watching on YouTube, I shuffled those 2 bullet points there on the show rundown. I want to hit the bench production. Like, it's pretty obvious that bench production's been an issue. I don't need to cite all the lack of bench scoring stats and all that stuff. To this point in the season, it's really just been, hey, is Naz Reid on? And if the answer is yes, then the bench scoring's fine. And if the answer is no, which it has been more often than we're used to, then there is no bench scoring. We can go back to the on-off numbers, the individual player on-off numbers that I cited a minute ago. The Timberwolves starters plus Jaylen Clark are the top 6 guys. Full stat, like that, the top 6 guys. Then it goes Mike Conley, 31st percentile, minus 4.6 on off, and then Naz Reid, then Rob Dillingham, and then TJ Shannon, who has played not a lot, but over 100 minutes. So he factors into it's enough to qualify for the cleaning the glass numbers. So all that is not great. I do want to point out, I wanted to call this out real quick. There's a tweet that was going around from Evan Sidery of NBA at the Forbes NBA crew. And he had posted that the Timberwolves 4-man lineup of Anthony Edwards, Jaden McDaniels, Rudy Gobert, and Julius Randle is dominating opponents. And he cited that they're like 3rd in offensive rating, 2nd in defensive rating, which is, by the way, it's misleading. If you look at the Timberwolves 4-man lineups, the Timberwolves have several 4-man lineups that are actually better than that. Like, if you pull the numbers, they've got, they've got Well, I don't know. It doesn't matter. It's the fifth best four-man lineup. And by the way, the four ahead of that lineup all include Dante DiVincenzo, who's not in the lineup that were mentioned by Evan on Twitter. That lineup of Gobert, Randle, Edwards, and McDaniels is a 14.7 net rating. It's behind four other lineups that all include DiVincenzo. By the way, Ant is only in two of those four lineups, for whatever that's worth. All four include DiVincenzo, and all four include Rudy Gobert, who have consistently been the two best on-off guys for Minnesota this year, and it hasn't really been close. Julius Randle, I guess, is close because the offense has been so dynamic with him on the floor. And you know, we did I did a show on this a couple weeks ago. It continues to be more stark where the Rudy defense is insane and the Julius offense is insane, but the reverse is also true for each of these guys. And that's kind of DiVincenzo is good with both of them. He's solid, consistent, both offensively and defensively. So what does that mean about the Timberwolves bench? Well, I think this goes back to roster building and roster construction, and we're only 6 weeks in. So that caveat obviously applies. But as I always say, we can only evaluate what we've seen so far. We could project out. And honestly, my projection is that I actually think the Wolves are better than what they're playing right now. And I said as much after the loss on Monday's show, after the Phoenix loss. Like, I still have hope that this roster construction is fine. I know there's a lot of people on X that would tell you that it's not. I don't want to get like super in the weeds on the Nickeil thing because I don't know. I don't disagree with how the Timberwolves handled Nickeil Alexander-Walker. Realistically, they could not have kept everybody. I understand keeping Naz over Nickeil. In theory, what Nickeil provides can be replicated more easily than what Naz Reid could provide. But if Naz Reid's not playing well and Mike Conley is a year older, then yeah, you're in a bit of a bind. And if Rob Dillingham isn't what you thought he was and TJ Shannon wasn't, and then he's hurt and now we just don't know, that's the problem the Wolves are having right now. Some combination of TJ Shannon, Rob Dillingham has to give you production because your bench right now is Naz Reid, who's hot and cold, Mike Conley, who's a year older and not giving you real offensive production. Yes, he's still a functional rotational player, but you can't count on him to do anything at a plus level. You can't count on him to be more than a spot up 3-point shooter. He's not really running your offense anymore. So if that's the case, now you turn to Rob Dillingham, TJ Shannon, each of whom has had an injury so far this year, and neither of whom has played very well, certainly not consistently. Now, I still hold out hope for TJ Shannon, especially being a really positive, having a really positive impact on this season. There's an ESPN article that came out. It might have even been before the game Monday. It was earlier this week. That was it Kevin Pelton, actually? It was a combination of folks from ESPN, and the Timberwolves section might have been written by Pelton, actually. That's important to me. It was written by Pelton. I say this all the time. I respect Pelton. I think he does a great job. Here's what he said. He said, "Can the Timberwolves replace Nickeil Alexander-Walker in-house? Depth was an edge for Minnesota en route to back-to-back conference finals appearances, but losing Alexander-Walker has turned it, meaning depth, into a weakness, despite getting 13 points per game off the bench from Naz Reid. Minnesota's 28th in both minutes and points per game by reserves. Given their depleted draft assets, developing a replacement for Alexander-Walker is critical. Thus far, Dillingham and TJ Shannon are both shooting under 40% effective field goal percentage, limiting their playing time. The closest thing Minnesota has to an in-house solution is Jaylen Clark, a strong perimeter defender who's played the most minutes of the Wolves' young guards and has shot 36% for three. But if opponents don't respect his shooting, it will be tough to keep him on the court in the playoff crucible." Okay. I agree with everything he said. Clearly, Pelton was given 3 paragraphs to explain the whole situation, and he did a pretty good job. I think there's obviously some nuance here, given the way Shannon started the year and then now the injury. I think they just got to give TJ Shannon more run. More run way. They just need to be like, "Hey, TJ, you're going to play 20 minutes tonight. Like, just figure it out." And actually, OKC might be the right team to do that against. Right/wrong. Right in that he might give the Wolves their best chance to win in a higher variance type game because of the way he plays. And also remember what he did against them in the playoffs briefly last year in very limited minutes. On the flip side, OKC is incredible, which we'll talk about. So maybe it's not the right idea coming off the injury still, but TJ's got to play more minutes. I think he is the quickest path to some additional bench production, increased pace, and also give you some decent defense. I know Dillingham has competed defensively this year, but overall he's still not a plus defensively. Neither Shannon, but I think he could be. So I think each of those guys needs to play more. And I know it's already dicey that they're 10-7, and I thought they'd only lose 7 games by January 1st. Clearly they're having some issues. The schedule is not going to get easier though. And they have to know what they have by the end of this calendar year before we get into actual trade season. Not that there's a whole lot the Wolves could do, but like they just need to have a better sense for what they have. And I don't think anyone can with a straight face say that we know that. I know there's a lot of dramatics on X right now and people saying like, this roster construction is terrible, all this stuff. I don't know. Like I don't think it's as terrible as like what the Nuggets did to Jokic a couple years ago. Like, here's all these rookies. Like we've seen flashes from Shannon at least to suggest that when he gets more runway, he'll have a higher impact. And the way he plays, I think he can. Dillingham, I'm less convinced about, but obviously we know that the pedigree is there. He's a lottery pick. We know the offensive talent he has. That's the trick, though, is if this is the route that you choose, in albeit like they were in part kind of forced into this route by the way that the roster was already set up and the lack of pivot points that they had. You got to be all in, and you got to hit on these guys, and to this point they haven't. So I think there needs to be more runway, especially for Shannon, but also for Dillingham. And they got to figure out what to do with Mike Conley, whether it's some sort of trade to move off of him or to find somebody to allow him to not play regular rotation minutes, move into more of a Joe Ingles role, which I know isn't the best asset management or use of roster spaces. But they got to figure something out because this bench production with DiVincenzo in the starting lineup is miserable. And you can't have a former six. You can't sit here, a year ago, we were talking about how the Wolves had 8 starters. That's what Chris Finch said. They're 28th in bench scoring right now. Not great. Okay, let's talk about the Wolves Thunder matchup. We'll do that here next to close out the show. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our new friends at DripDrop, and I'll tell you what, DripDrop is amazing. I started drinking DripDrop over the last couple weeks, and I absolutely love it. You might be able to tell by my voice, I'm a little bit under the weather right now. And DripDrop is honestly, like, no exaggeration, is making me feel a lot better when I drink it. I'm drinking at least 2 a day over the course of this week, and I legitimately was telling my wife, I feel a boost after I drink DripDrop. Everything works better when you're hydrated, so it's no surprise. Your focus, energy, mood, your skin, and that's why I love DripDrop. It's doctor-developed hydration that keeps me running at full power no matter what my day looks like, and it's not your average sports drink. It delivers 3 times the electrolytes and half the sugar of leading brands, using a science-backed formula trusted by medical professionals, firefighters, and over 90% of top collagen pro teams. As I mentioned, it has been really a game changer for me throughout this week. I had an orange one last night. I'm going to go lime and then watermelon, I think, today. I'm already planning out my DripDrop schedule. I love all the flavors. And honestly, hydration's become non-negotiable, especially when I'm feeling a little bit under the weather. DripDrop will help me feel sharper, calmer, and just better overall. Right now, DripDrop is offering podcast listeners 20% off your first order. Go to DripDrop.com and use promo code LOCKDOWNNBA. That's DripDrop.com. Promo code LOCKDOWNNBA for 20% off. Stock up now before the heat hits hard, and keep your body and mind performing at their best with DripDrop. Okay. So the Thunder, I don't know that it's any secret. It shouldn't be a secret. The OKC Thunder are, at this point, historically impressive over the last year plus, calendar year. They've only lost once this year. It was a last-minute loss to the Trailblazers, and since that loss, they've won 9 in a row. And by the way, they just beat the Trailblazers by 17 in the rematch. They have not played a game that finished with a single-digit margin since the Blazers lost. Over this 9-game winning streak, every single game has been a double-digit win, and the closest game has been 13 points. That was against the Hornets, believe it or not, like a week and a half ago. It's just incredible. Like, overall this season, they beat the Rockets by 1 on opening night. Then they beat the Pacers somehow only by 6. They beat the Mavs by 7. So I guess they had a few more single-digit games. They had, 4 single-digit games. So they were 8-0 with 4 single-digit wins. The rest of them were all double-digit wins. They lost 1 to the Blazers by 2. And now since then, they've had a 9-game winning streak, all by wins by 13 points or more. So overall this season, the Thunder are 17-1, have lost 1 game by 2 points, and only played in 4 games that they did not win by double digits. That's how dominant they've been. And by the way, it's surprising when you think about it. Like, obviously the Pacers were great with Halliburton and obviously Miles Turner and everything last year, but it's surprising to think that the finals went to 7 games with how dominant. OKC has a differential plus 16.9. The next best in the league is the Rockets at 11.2. Nobody in the East has a point differential better than +7. Minnesota, for what it's worth, is +5.4. Not worth a lot when you're 10-7, but they're better than two teams ahead of them in the West. So the Wolves right now are 7th in the West, but they're 5th in point differential in the West. Now, easy schedule caveat applies. Both the Timberwolves and the Thunder have played easy schedules. The Thunder have actually, I think, played the easiest schedule of the entire NBA. Now, that always gets skewed too, because by definition, if the teams the Thunder are playing are getting beat by the Thunder, then we know that that's part of the reason those teams aren't good, right? Like the Thunder have played, they've beaten the Kings they've beaten the Kings 3 times, right? So that deflates the Kings record for whatever that's worth. But yeah, they haven't really played the only likely playoff teams that they've played to this point, for what it's worth. The Lakers, struggling Clippers, and struggling Golden State. So I'm not even sure, they're probably at least playing teams, but I mean, that's it. And Houston, who they beat in double overtime on opening night by 1 point. Besides that, they haven't played any good teams from the East. The only Eastern Conference teams that the Thunder have played to this point, the Pacers early on, Atlanta very early on, Washington, Charlotte, and that's it. They barely played any teams in the East. So things are going to get a little tougher for OKC, but they're obviously historically good and by far the best team in the NBA. And when you think about it, Jalen Williams still hasn't even played. J-Dub hasn't played at all. SGA is actually questionable for tonight's game with an illness. I obviously would expect him to play. But Aaron Wiggins has been out a little bit. He's missed a couple of weeks now. So he's played in 9 of their 18 games to this point, and J-Dub hasn't played at all yet. And this team is 17-1. It's just incredible. It's all the same, what you would expect in terms of how good they are. They're 12th in 3-point rate, 16th in percentage, so nothing massive there. Defensively, or I should let's finish with the offense. Outside of SGA, they don't get to the free throw line. He's the only guy in this team that gets the line. Chet's free throw rate is actually down, lower than what you might expect it to be. But it's SGA gets the line so much. He's over 9 per game that it doesn't really matter. They don't offensive rebound, which is good for the Wolves. That's not what they put their effort to. So for them, it's more about not turning it over, SGA getting to the free throw line, and knocking down open shots. And remember, the Wolves tried, the game they came back and won in OKC in, was it February? When Ant was banged up, sat for a while, came back, got the big block on SGA at the end of the regulation, and then sat in overtime, and they ended up winning the game. Kind of the reverse of, which, by the way, quick side note, the reverse of what just happened against the Kings. The difference being, obviously, that the Wolves are actually good last year and the Kings are not good this year. But if you think about it, stuff like this happens all the time over the course of the season. And as much as it feels like the sky is falling because of the consecutive results on the road for Minnesota, Phoenix, and Sacramento over the last few days, it's November still. A lot can change. OKC collapsed against Minnesota in February, and they were a historically good team last year. So stuff happens. All that to say, Minnesota's strategy of loading up on SGA, making other guys beat them by knocking down threes, that's still probably the best strategy to beat OKC. You just got to hope those guys don't make shots. And if Aaron Wiggins is out, which he still is, there's less league average plus 3-point shooters. That's kind of the crazy thing, is you go down the list, they've got a lot of averagey shooters, Caruso's 36%, Isaiah Joe's 41%, but he would be the one exception, I guess, besides SGA himself. Chet's just 34%. Dort is 33%. Cason Wallace is 37%, so league average. AJ Mitchell's just 34%. Wiggins is out. He's about 42%. So without Wiggins, it's obviously load up on SGA, and you're only closing out to touch on Isaiah Joe. Everybody else, you're okay with beating you versus SGA getting to the free throw line or knocking down an open three himself. That's got to be the strategy offensively. Now, defensively, the Thunder are still number 1 in turnover rate and number 1 in opponent effective field goal percentage, which is insane to be number 1 in both of those categories. That's a really hard thing to do, because it means you're not strictly gambling all the time. It means that you're playing solid one-on-one defense, which we know. I'm not at all suggesting the Thunder were gambling at any point, but that's what this shows you, is the Thunder could just play straight up, and they're that good on the ball, and they're that good help defense that they're able to be number 1 in turnover rate, creating turnovers on their opponent, but also, forcing opponents into tough shots, contesting their jumpers, etc. On cleaning the glass, they're actually second in effective field goal percentage, opponent effective field goal percentage, but number one in turnover rate. They're a good rebounding team. They don't foul a lot. It's incredible that they don't get called for more fouls. And there is certainly an element of, we talked about this in the playoffs last year, they can't call them all, right? That's how OKC plays. The refs can't call everything. So we may end up, they're actually fouling less this year than they were last year. They may end up in the penalties sometimes, but they will never let an opponent get easy buckets on them, right? And that's a mentality, and it's a little bit how the Wolves played a couple of years ago when they were the top defense of the league. Obviously, to a whole other level beyond that. So for Minnesota, it's take care of the basketball, do your best to knock down, to not turn it over, and then just knock down open shots, crash the defensive glass, secure rebounds, and run where you can, and make somebody besides SGA beat you. That's way easier said than done. And SGA is still going to get his. But that has to be the approach in this game for Minnesota. We'll have a live postcast with Jack and Luke tonight. I'll have my show, even though tomorrow's Thanksgiving. Likely the show will post overnight tonight into Thanksgiving Day. So we will have a show no matter what, both the postcast and then my regular postgame pod. And I will be back Friday for a show to get you ready for the weekend of games for Minnesota back at Target Center. So yes, still shows tomorrow and Friday. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. A reminder for your second listen to check out the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Show with Josh Lloyd. It's the number one fantasy basketball podcast out there, giving you daily tips and helping you win your league, all while making you a smarter NBA fan. Find Locked On Fantasy Basketball on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Of course, this show is part of that very same Locked On Podcast Network, your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.